You had a good Thanksgiving?
I hope you did too. Good to see you.
Highway conference kept us all busy. How are you? So it looks like we're going to get.
Rules Committee to come to order, and good evening. Today, the Rules Committee will meet on three important items: SJ Res 23, SJ Res 24, HR 8, the North American Energy Security and Infrastructure Act of 2015. And I'm delighted that we are not jammed today. We have two very important guests who will be with us to talk about these important issues. SJ 23 provides for congressional disapproval under the Congressional Review Act of the EPA's final rule governing greenhouse emissions from new, modified, and reconstructed power plants. SJ Res 24 provides for similar disapproval of the EPA's rule, commonly known as the Clean Power Plan, that purports to regulate carbon dioxide emissions from existing fossil fuel-fired power plants. Together, these two EPA rules would lead to higher electricity rates, would threaten access to reliable electricity, and would kill as many as 125,000 American jobs. Simply put, the EPA is trying to fundamentally change the way electricity is generated, distributed, and consumed in the United States of America. And these are two resolutions that would put a stop to those job-killing, price-raising efforts. H.R. 8 would modernize the nation's energy laws and infrastructure so that America could unleash its own wealth of energy resources. This bill reflects the fact that our nation's access to energy supplies has changed, but our policies have not kept up with those changes. Gas prices, for an example, have plummeted from nearly $4.40 in Dallas, Texas, as recently as 2012 to below $2 today. As a matter of fact, it's $1.87 in Wiley, Texas, saving American families and households hundreds of dollars each year. This temporary slide in prices could be made permanent if the free market is allowed to operate to place technologies that provide families with access to cheap, effective energy options. America has fundamental advantages in the energy sector, and I believe we must continue to leverage these resources that have been given to the United States of America. You and I both know, Mr. Whitfield, that the bottom line is this is a terribly divisive political issue. On one side is people who want us to have higher prices, want us to consume energy from other places around the globe, and do not want us to be able to take our God-given resources that we have. However, fortunately, we have someone to stand up for the Republican Party. That's Chairman Ed Whitfield, gentleman from Hobsonville, Kentucky, and certainly equally able a Democrat from New York, Mr. Tonko, and I know both of you are here to debate these issues, to talk with us about these important measures, H.R. 8, S.J.Res. 23, S.J.Res. 24. I would simply say that having both of you here today is an exercise. I invite both of you to come up to the table. And before we get too far along, I want to say hi to my dear friend from Florida and hope that he's doing well. The gentleman is recognized for any opening statement the gentleman chooses to make.
Mr. Chairman, in response to your initial comments, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include the statements on SJ-Res 23 and SJ-Res 24 administration policy. And in each instance, the President staff has indicated that he would veto the measures. The irony can't be lost, Mr. Chairman, on the fact that we are here today on measures that will undermine the EPA's efforts to combat climate change at almost identical time that 150 countries are meeting in France with reference to carbon pollution. I make no argument to you about one thing. I do charge you a little bit. When gas prices were near $4, everyone was saying that President Obama was at fault. And I'm just curious if we can agree that maybe the President deserves some credit for the lower gas prices. Truth of the matter is that he did allow for a substantial number of leases, probably not as much as you would have wanted, but more than I wanted. And I guess it has something to do with it, but I just like to point that out, that when things are bad, it's the President's fault. When things are good, he doesn't get no credit. That's just kind of funny to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well, it seems like this president wants to get credit on both sides. And when you try and get credit on both sides, that's when I think it's fair to point that up too. You know, I don't know. I know this one does. So we'll take to that. I hope you had a good time during Thanksgiving, and Judge, and I'm glad that you're back here, and thank you very much. Gentlemen, welcome to the Rules Committee. I think, Ed, you're Exhibit A for us most of the time. You figured out what we do up here, how we do it, and why we do it. But Mr. Tonko, I want to thank you also for taking time not only to join us today, but knowing that I know you represent your party, I know you represent your state, and I know you represent yourself well. Anything you have in writing, however, would, from both of you, help our awesome stenographer in her effort to recreate the things that happen up here. And so I hope that you'll take time to leave that for. Mr. Chairman, thank you for taking time to be here today. I do note and need to note that this discussion today, H.R. 8, is just about general debate. It is not about the amendments. We will have the amendment process that I know the committee understands we will do tomorrow. And so I want to appreciate what you've got to say about that, but we will get into the debate about amendments tomorrow. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, Chairman Sessions, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Slaughter and all members of the Rules Committee. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here to discuss the rule for H.R. 8, as well as the closed rule on S.J. Resolution 23 and Senate Joint Resolution 24. I might say that I'm going to get into the issue of climate change. And the Democratic Party, generally speaking, feel very strong about climate change. I think that the President has made it clear that he views climate change as the #1 issue facing mankind today. And all of us recognize that the climate is changing, but I just would preface my remarks by saying our disagreement with the President really is about the fact that he places it as a priority #1. And meetings that we've had with developing countries, even our allies in Europe, and even today a poll came out in America that the American people, only about 3%, see climate change as a pressing issue. We all admit that the climate is changing, but it was frustrating dealing with this bill because we had an opportunity, I think, to do even a lot more than we did. But I feel very good about H.R. 8 because we're addressing reliability issues, and with the President making the decision that he was not going to work with Congress, but through executive orders and regulation, he was going to implement his clean energy plan. Reliability was a concern for many of us. So we're addressing reliability in H.R. 8. We also want to protect affordability because most of the development of the shale gas has occurred on private lands. And in order to we're very fortunate that energy prices are going down, certainly in the natural gas sector, also in the oil sector. Part of that has had to do with our domestic production going up. And one of the things we're trying to do in this bill, of course, is have access to markets. So one of the things that H.R. 8 does is try to streamline the permitting for natural gas pipelines domestically, intrastate, as well as into other countries. Another thing that we try to address in this bill relates to geopolitical. I made some reference to our allies in Europe, developing countries from around the world coming to us, asking us to expedite the export of crude oil, export of natural gas products, because that many of them are fed up with relying on the Russians providing natural gas into Europe and having that economic power over them. So we feel that this bill is a good bill. I might say that on the issue of climate change, our Democratic friends in the committee wanted us to address climate change in this bill. But there are 64 government programs operating in the U.S. already on climate change. The President, through his clean energy plan, is trying to address it, but we think it's so extreme and unprecedented power grab that we felt it was absolutely essential that we use the Congressional Review Act to bring this back under our control. I might add that when Larry Tribe came to testify in Congress, who taught constitutional law to the President at Harvard, Mr. Tribe said this clean energy plan, certainly on the existing utility plan, was like ripping up the U.S. Constitution. In fact, EPA had to change 30 years of its own legal analysis to allow the existing plants to be regulated under 111D of the Clean Air Act, which had never been done before except in very minute, extreme circumstances. So we think that both of these bills are essential, H.R. 8, as well as the Senate's already adopted their joint resolutions. We've reported both of them out of committee, but we would like to pick up those Senate bills because they simply disapprove the President's clean energy plan, which many of us view as extreme, unprecedented, and in violation of the Clean Air Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tonko?
Yes, thank you, Chair Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter and all of the members of the committee for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on behalf of the Democrats on the subcommittee. I'm a last-minute assignment for the Dems to appear before the Rules Committee because of some scheduling conflicts they had. to avoid my own scheduling conflict, I unfortunately will offer my statement and then have to move on, and I hope you can bear with me. I'm here this afternoon to express support, strong support, for the maximum general debate time possible on H.R. 8 and S.J. Resolution 23 and S.J. Resolution 24. Unfortunately, I'm asking for this general debate time because we have many on our side of the aisle who wish to speak in strong opposition to all three of these bills. And although I strongly oppose H.R. 8, I urge you to grant an open rule so that we have some hope of improving this bill to the point where it is more than just a partisan bill that does very little to move national energy policy forward. A very strong message here, asking for maximum general debate time. The two resolutions that the House will consider this week, S.J. Res. 23 and S.J. Res. 24, are the latest in a long line of bills this Congress has considered to block any effort by this administration to address the serious long-term challenge of climate change. S.J. Resolution 23 provides for congressional disapproval of the Environmental Protection Agency's recent final carbon pollution rule for new and modified power plants. Similarly, S.J. Resolution 24, as we know, provides for congressional disapproval of EPA's recent final carbon pollution rule for existing power plants, commonly known as the Clean Power Plan. I strongly oppose both of these resolutions, but hope that the committee will provide for sufficient time for members to fully express their views on the legislation. This is hefty legislation. It deserves that sort of debate. I believe both S.J. Resolution 23 and S.J. Resolution 24 are harmful and unnecessary. The administration will veto them, and these regulations will move forward. The opponents will still have their day, more likely weeks or months, in court to challenge EPA's power plant rules. But I believe the Clean Power Plan should move forward. Our nation should be leading the rest of the world by example. The standards set by the two rules that make up the Clean Power Plan are achievable. They provide states with flexibility, and they strike an appropriate balance amongst the many recommendations made by the numerous stakeholders who commented on EPA's proposed rules. With regard to H.R. 8, I believe all of us started with the intention of continuing the Energy and Commerce Committee's long tradition of working on comprehensive energy legislation in a bipartisan fashion. And so we did, reporting a bill from subcommittee on a voice vote. However, that positive bit of progress did not last, and we are left with a partisan bill that does very little to move national energy policy forward. This bill provides no funding to address key energy infrastructure needs, something that Chair Upton, Ranking Member Pallone, Chair Whitfield, and Ranking Member Rush initially had agreed was necessary. The bill does nothing to address the public health and safety hazard created by old, leaky natural gas pipelines. It does nothing to assist states, our states, and local governments in their efforts to upgrade and modernize the electric grid. It is ironic that at a time Congress is considering sales of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to fund various programs, that this bill is silent on the infrastructure maintenance issues associated with SPRO that the administration identified in its quadrennial energy review. This bill's focus is on the past, not the future. It rolls back efforts to improve energy efficiency, does nothing to encourage expansion of renewable energy, and ignores climate change altogether. Even the most bipartisan title, one that Ranking Member Rush worked across the aisle on for more than a year, language to encourage more participation by minorities, women, and veterans in the energy workforce, is being deleted from the bill. And these provisions, those provisions that are being added, are extreme partisan proposals from the Resources Committee, including language to allow natural gas companies to build pipelines right through our national parks. H.R. 8 could have been a strong, bipartisan consensus bill. It is not. I note that members both on and outside the Energy and Commerce Committee have filed numerous amendments to that bill. Clearly, energy remains a key concern for members and their constituents. And judging from the sheer number of amendments, it seems H.R. 8 has not addressed many of these concerns, if not most of them. Therefore, I urge the committee to report an open rule to allow for certainly Ranking Member Pallone, Ranking Member Rush, and all members on both sides of the aisle to present their ideas to the full House by offering their amendments. Again, I thank you, Chair Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter, and the committee for your consideration of a request here on behalf of the members who submitted amendments to H.R. 8. And again, our message, full and forceful, is maximum time for open debate, full debate with the entire House on such an important issue. And with that, I yield back and thank you.
Franco, thank you very much. Mr. Whitfield, we are here today as a result of action by the Senate. Is that correct?
Yes.
We're here because action in the Senate that passed the Senate then brings it over here, which means that we no longer have to fight back and forth with the Senate. We can come to some agreement about a not being in favor of what this president is doing with this matter.
Absolutely. You're right. The Senate's already passed it. And, when EPA testified on the Clean Energy Plan, both the new and existing rules, they stressed how hard they had worked with the states to provide states maximum flexibility. And yet 27 states have filed a lawsuit against the Clean Energy Plan, claiming that they are going to have great difficulty. And I might add that EPA normally, on major rules like this, gives states 3 years to develop their state implementation plan. On the Clean Energy Plan, they're giving them until September of 2016 because they want it completed before President Obama leaves office, and they wanted the regulation final before he went to France next month, or I guess he's there now, for the climate change policy. But, there's a disagreement on this depending on what your philosophy is, but we believe that the 64 government programs already in operation are addressing climate change. It is an issue that we're all concerned about, but the president, as I said, views it as the #1 issue. We think there are other more pressing issues that deserve a priority.
Mr. Whitfield, do you believe one of these is home heating fuel?
I absolutely do.
So what has the president said about home heating fuel, which is essentially diesel fuel that the Northeast just pumps into their systems and encourages not only its use, but subsidizes that?
Well, absolutely, and the polar vortex caused the use of more diesel fuels up in the Northeast. We don't have adequate infrastructure to get the natural gas up there. We've heard testimony from political leaders throughout the Northeast on that issue, and if you're really concerned about climate change, you wouldn't want to be encouraging the use of diesel fuel oil, which is even dirtier than coal, particularly with supercritical plants like the Turk plant in Arkansas, where you can burn coal relatively clean, certainly compared to that.
Interesting. And so we got into a little bit of politics earlier about these pesky Republicans that want this natural gas. It's cleaner than home heating fuel?
Absolutely, it's cleaner. Natural gas is cleaner. It's cleaner than anything we're using now, except certain renewables and certainly the nuclear
And so with
facilities.
the abundance, is there an abundance of natural gas?
Absolutely, there's an abundance.
Which does what to the prices?
It lowers the price of natural gas, and which helps our retail users, helps our utilities, helps us be more competitive in the global marketplace and to compete in a strong economic way in a world market.
So if we were sitting back at the White House looking at results or at the EPA of greenhouse emissions over the last few years as a result of this great trend in natural gas, have we seen the numbers come down on greenhouse emissions?
Well, last year there was an analysis, and our CO2 emissions are the lowest they've been in 20 years. America doesn't have to take a back seat to any other country in the world on greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a good story to tell, and I humbly would say that I don't know why the president is placing us at a disadvantage with other countries when he's pressing us further down the road than other countries. We're one of the only countries in the world today where you cannot build a new coal plant because the technology is not available to meet the emission standards set by EPA.
So in other words, they're requiring standards that aren't even available.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting. I was in Butler, Pennsylvania with a gentleman, Mr. Kelly, and spoke to a bunch of business owners. And the bunch of the business owners actually were trying to work with their locals, what I call in Texas a COG, a centralized organization of governments. And they wanted to bring in more jobs, and they were told they could not because of the allocation of electricity that would have to go, instead of for more jobs, they were cutting it back and it would have to be just for residential use. And is that the story that is the example of the loss of jobs and inability of a region to be able to effectively bring itself back and take care of itself under these rules?
No, I think that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. I mean, reliability is going to be vitally important. And we know with the winter, last winter, that we heard the testimony that the polar vortex, except for the coal plants at that time, would have created some blackouts and some brownouts because we don't have the access of these pipelines to get enough natural gas there. And the renewables simply are not able to provide that at this time. I might say one of the frustrating things about dealing with H.R. 8, Mr. Tonko, I'm sorry he left, and I wish Mr. Rush was here, but we agreed with Mr. Rush to put in the provision about giving minorities and men and women and other groups access to more jobs in the energy sector. And we even provided some funding for it. But in return for that, for example, we wanted FERC to step up to the plate and address the reliability issue more, because with the Clean Energy Plan, EPA was making the determination that reliability would not be impacted. And so we wanted FERC to step up to the plate, be more involved to ensure us of that. And our Democratic friends on the committee would not agree with that. And so another issue that we wanted, in the 2007 Energy Policy Act, a provision was put in that prohibits the federal government in any federal building or from using fossil fuels after the year 2030. We're not advocating or mandating that fossil fuels have to be used after 2030 in government buildings, but we think that option should be available. So we said we would just want to repeal that prohibition. They would not agree with that. So they would not agree with the four issues that we considered important, although in the scheme of things they're not all that important. But because they would not agree, then we said, well, then, we're not going to work together. We're not going to work together.
Well, the numbers that I looked at showed almost a 90% reduction over the last several years in greenhouse emissions that we have achieved in the United States of America. And as you said, the lowest numbers of output in 20 years. Maybe that's because we have the lowest number of people working in the United States since 1978 as a result of the Obama administration's economic policies in this country. And it sounds like that it's an environmentalist policy also that works on energy, where they would sooner have rules and regulations as opposed to jobs. Agreed.
Absolutely. I mean, we're very concerned with the Clean Energy Plan. We've been struggling coming out of this recession, and we want robust economic growth, and we're very much concerned that this will have impact on electricity costs, will prove an impediment to economic growth, and will make us less competitive in the global marketplace.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate our colleague, Mr. Whitfield, for being here, and I want to tell him we're going to miss him.
Thank you.
After he retires. It's been a real joy to work with him as one of the co-chairs of the Turkish Caucus. And I appreciate his great work on energy and commerce also, but I am going to miss him. I don't have any questions. I appreciate his bringing the bills, and I particularly appreciate his depth of knowledge on this issue and his ability to field all your questions and comments. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman. I yield
thank
back.
you, thank you, thank you.
Mr. McGovern?
Well, thank you. I'll be brief because on my way to the airport here, I apparently picked a short straw, and I'll handle this role tomorrow. I'll have lots of time to talk tomorrow, but I do just want to point out for the record that we have 7 legislative days before the December 11th deadline so we could avert a government shutdown, and I was kind of hoping that that would be our first order of business here today, but again, we're going to bring it right up to the edge, which is unfortunate, because then we find out all these riders and things that are tucked away inside of it that we don't ever have a chance to read. But I'll just say this briefly, Mr. Whitfield, I don't know whether you believe in climate change is a problem or not. I know a big chunk of your caucus doesn't believe it is a problem. I think they're on the wrong side of history. The bills that we're talking about here today, I think my colleague from Florida already inserted the administration policy statements in the record, which they will all be vetoed. But I will tell you this: this issue of climate change is a real issue, not only as it affects the United States, but the entire world. And we ought to be the leader, and that's what I think the president is trying to do to deal with this issue. And it's not just an issue that environmentalists care about. Pope Francis made a big deal about it when he came to Washington. He's made several statements about it. Overwhelming majority of science.
The loss of a couple hours tomorrow. So, Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank my friend for being there, and I want to echo Ms. Fox's point about we're all going to miss you. My nickname for Mr. Whitfield is the Grand Poobah of the Turkish caucus, of which I'm proud to be a member. But seriously, we've had a
Mr.
chance,
Hastings, a member too.
to work together and travel, and you've been a great member, and you will be missed. I just want to make a couple of points and get your response on this bill. I'm going to disagree a little bit with my friend from Florida. I think if you actually checked, you'd find the leases on federal lands are down, not up, under this administration, and that most of the energy production, as my friend pointed out, that has given us low energy, unprecedentedly low energy prices, have come off private land, and honestly have come without much federal involvement whatsoever. The federal government didn't have much to do with fracking, didn't discover the technology, didn't implement it, and indeed, the president predicted when he was running for office that if the policies that he wanted to implement were actually put in place, that the cost of electricity would, quote, necessarily skyrocket. And I think that's what's going to happen if some of these regulations are that the EPA is advancing and some of the policies that the administration is advancing are put in place. I have to tell you, I have no problem with renewable energy. I think it's a good thing. We actually get 17% of our electricity in Oklahoma from wind energy now. So, and I've been a strong supporter of the wind tax credit. I'm a believer in that. And I think we can achieve a lot if we incentivize behavior and work with industry. And I think in that case we did. The administration deserves some credit for that. But I think in this case we're being punitive and bureaucratic. And frankly, I do think, as is so often the case, presidents use, Republican and Democrat, I might add, use the executive branch to go around Congress and use the authorities that they assert. I think we will end up in court. And, the president had one view, this is not related to this, on immigration policy. May be the right thing, may be the wrong thing. He tried to do it, through executive action. And lo and behold, it didn't happen. We ended up in court. There was a stay. I think it's going to the Supreme Court now. I think the same thing's going to happen on some of this stuff. But I would invite the president to work with Congress on this a little more. I think he would find in some of these areas he's got more support on both sides of the aisle than he might expect. But I do think, to my friend's point, treating carbon-based energy, which is 80% plus of our energy supply and is going to be the leading source of energy for the rest of our lives in this room. I mean, there's almost no doubt about it, and it certainly is in other parts of the world. finding ways to make it cleaner or finding appropriate substitutes that are cost-effective, that don't raise the prices on hardworking Americans or frankly hardworking people in other countries, is the right way to go. We may have a little more latitude here than people in India or China do, just given the relative living standard we have. But, I don't think it's a good thing to put thousands of coal miners out of work in places like Kentucky and Indiana and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and out west. I think there's ways to make that energy usable and affordable and clean, and we ought to be investing in those ways. I don't think you preemptively start shutting down American industries, particularly when other countries, frankly, aren't doing that. I mean, the Chinese are developing coal at a very rapid rate, about one new plant a week. And the fact that we can't do that with an abundant supply of energy here in the country is something we ought to seriously consider. So I'd ask you to address 2 points quickly. One, to your knowledge, has our energy production, again, gone up because of activity on federal land, or is energy activity on federal land lower? And two, give us some idea of what the impact of delaying projects and delaying production that some of the regulation that the EPA has proposed is.
Well, we've had a lot of hearings on this, and I think EIA and all the groups agree that increased production has occurred on private lands, and the leases on public lands has gone down, and it's due to horizontal drilling and the discoveries in the places like the Bakken Field. So we're very fortunate in that regard, and most of the oil certainly being produced is a light sweet as opposed to a heavy sour, which is being used primarily in our refineries. That's why we think that a lot of that could be exported without significant damage to our refiners in the U.S., and other countries are looking for it. So I think you're exactly right on that point. And your second point was what now?
Yeah, the impact of regulation in
Yeah.
terms of slowing.
Yeah. Well, they recently had that oil spill out off the coast of California. You remember that was about 6 months ago. And we actually had a hearing about it. And it turned out that EPA and not EPA, but the agency over the Department of Transportation that has jurisdiction over some of these pipelines were still developing their regulations of a bill that we passed in 2007 on pipeline safety. So a lot of them were giving, one of the major reasons for that is that these companies are resisting expending large sums of capital upgrading a lot of their facilities right now and building new facilities because of waiting on regulations coming out of some of the federal agencies. And one of the reasons that the federal agency's been slow on this is because the administration really has had as number one goal addressing climate change as opposed and focusing on clean energy plan and other plans like that. And OMB's placed that as a priority, and so they're dragging their feet on some basic safety regulation issues relating to pipelines, for example.
Well, I would just submit, and not directly related, but I think it's illustrative, that in the administration, this pursuit of or a climate change theology, if you will, and again, I'm not debating the science, but it sometimes leads to really impractical decisions. Keystone is a pretty good example of that. If you're really worried about the environment, pipelines are a lot better way to move production than trucks and trains. It's safer,
Right,
it's
right,
cleaner, it
right.
uses less energy, it actually lowers the price by about $10 a barrel. And yet that, to me, is an example where politics and the decision-making got into what should have been a rational and pretty easy call, no matter which side of the climate change debate you happen to be on. It's just a better way to do things. Again, I think we could find some common ground, but if we're going to have really executive branch dictates as opposed to legislation hammered out, then I think this is going to continue to be an extremely contentious issue.
Well, it is, and I might say that on the clean energy plan on the existing plants, those caps established for each state are arbitrary by EPA. Initially, Kentucky was said that they would have to reduce by 18%. The final rule comes in at 41%. And so when they talk about maximum flexibility for the states, that's why you see so many of the states filing these lawsuits, because they view those limits as arbitrary, and it's going to be extremely difficult for them to meet. And for the first time ever, they're able to go outside the fence and mandate what entities are doing that really are not contributing to CO2 emissions.
Well, we have, just again, for the record, my own state, we are wrestling right now with these mandates. Our state's involved in some of these lawsuits against the EPA. Now, it's the state, again, that gets 17% of its electricity from wind power that is continuing to actively develop and incentivize wind power. And yet, we're about to have a $1.2 billion rate increase requested by our major utilities to offset the cost, even though by any objective measure, frankly, pollution's gone down rather than up in a place like Oklahoma, and we've been moving pretty aggressively to try and look at renewable sources of energy where they make sense for us.
Absolutely.
Again, I applaud you and your committee for bringing forth these things. I think you have to make the argument. The president's always free to use his veto pen if he chooses to, but he won't be president forever.
Well, one of the practical impacts, renewables, I think all of us support all of the above policy. I don't know that the president does, because he does not want to use coal. But California's certainly been a leader in renewables. And recently, we had a discussion with the CEO of one of the major utilities out there, and they're having to build a new grid in order to bring the renewable power into the urban areas. And he pointed out to me that it was costing them $100 million.
As opposed to working step by step in a direction that you want to go. So I think that's what you're trying to do here. I appreciate that, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Judge Hastings. Gentleman does not seek time. Mr. Polis. Gentleman does not seek time. Dr. Burgess, who will be handling this for us.
Correct,
from
so
your-
I will get plenty of time to talk tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
But Mr. Whitfield, and I too have enjoyed serving with you on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we will miss you
Thank you.
next term. I remember a subcommittee hearing. I don't think it was your subcommittee. I think it was Oversight and Investigations. I think it was Bart Stupak who was chairman in 2008. And we had literally a day-long hearing on the fact that gasoline was $4 a gallon and diesel fuel was, I think, $5.50, at least in the Texas market that summer, July of 2008. And we had witnesses from all across the spectrum. We had oil producers, we had hedge fund managers, we had people who speculated in the dark markets and people who bought on the hedge. All kinds of legislation was proposed and I think passed by the House that summer. None of it ever passed the Senate, so obviously none of it ever amounted to a hill of beans. But the price came down. And I'll just never forget, one of the things we heard that morning, one of the producers was asked, why, with gas prices so high, why don't you just simply produce more? And that notion was actually scoffed at by the chairman of the subcommittee. It would take 7 years to bring that product to market. So those of us who said drill here, drill now, pay less, were in fact marginalized because that wasn't a realistic solution. Abundance could not be achieved by simply producing. So here we are 7 years later. And my only observation is they missed it by a year because the price came down a year ago, October.
Right.
And they were off, but it was only 6 years that it took to get the product to market. Abundance does work, markets do work. And I would just offer that observation from someone who has watched this process for a long time. I'm glad you're bringing H.R. 8 to the floor. I'm glad we're going to get a chance to vote on it. And again, as the chairman pointed out, I'll get a chance to talk on it a lot tomorrow. But thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Byrne? No question. Gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from the state of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Always a pleasure to be recognized by the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much.
I just, brief comment, Mr. Whitfield, about some of the provisions regarding hydropower. I come from the Pacific Northwest, where that's a very important source of clean, renewable energy. And there are several provisions within H.R. 8 that make improvements to many aspects of hydroelectric energy. And so I just wanted to point that out, that some of the things that the non-federal relicensing of hydroelectric dams takes upwards of 10 years to accomplish, which is very expensive. And just talking about the impacts of ratepayers, that's another hidden tax that increases the cost of energy. So that, along with several other changes that have been made to the bill that improve how we as a nation embrace truly one of the most renewable, cleanest sources of energy we have. And so I just wanted to point out that those are very good provisions of this legislation. And thank you for bringing it forward.
Yeah, well, Mr. Newhouse, I really appreciate your pointing that out, but you're right, absolutely correct. There are some provisions in here relating to hydro, which makes this licensing procedure a little bit less complicated and less time, and we think that's very important. So thank you.
Yeah. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you very much. You know, visiting the Northwest is really very interesting when you go and see these hydro plants where they effectively use not just falling water, but the turbines and all the things that have to be done because they perfected them. They made them work, and I think that free people do a whole lot better than one-size-fits-all government that tells you what to do. Mr. Whitfield, I want to thank you for taking time. I did not get a chance to compliment you on what might be an impending retirement, so I'm going to hold that back. We hope you did well enough to get invited back a bunch next year, and unless Connie just wanted to hear the retirement song today, so tell her you're not going to get it from me. We're going to make you come back. I appreciate your time, and the gentleman is always welcome up here, and your thoughtful conversation with us is beneficial each and every time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
If you'll please make sure you leave something for our awesome stenographer. She speaks Texan, but she can speak Hopkinsville, Kentucky, too.
My pants are connected to my chair. I can't move it.
Well, that clamp down there is working. It didn't work on Mr. Tonko. Mr. Tonko didn't have that problem. He got out of here real fast.
I realized that as soon as I started talking the first time. I said, "Wait, I can't
What
get
is
out of here."
this?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Chair would now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather of the Community, North Carolina, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mrs. Fox.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for consideration of H.R. 8, the North American Energy Security Infrastructure Act of 2015. The rule provides 1 hour general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that no further consideration of the bill may be in order except pursuant to a subsequent order of the House. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of S.J. Res. 26, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of a rule submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency related to standards of performance for greenhouse gas emissions from new, modified, and reconstructed stationary sources, electric utility generating units, and S.J. Res. 24, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of a rule submitted by the Environmental Protection Agency related to carbon pollution emission guidelines for existing stationary sources, electric utility generating units under closed rules. The rule provides 1 hour debate on each joint resolution equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of each joint resolution. The rule provides that each joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in each joint resolution. Finally, the rule provides each joint resolution 1 motion to recommit.
Now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Is there discussion or amendment to that? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Roll call,
Gentlemen, ask for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
Mr. Chairman, I will vote yes, but I misread this statement. The final statement should say, finally, the rule provides each joint resolution one motion to commit. I thought there was a typo, and I corrected it. I was wrong.
So the
Thank you.
correct verbiage should be,
Finally, the rule provides each joint resolution one motion to commit.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that
Excuse
opportunity.
me, I'm
I
going
vote
to go
yes.
back and start back. Is there amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Still no.
Still no. Thank you very much. And the gentleman asked for a roll call vote from Massachusetts. Clerk will poll the committee.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
Motion is agreed to, is agreed to. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess, will be handling this for Republicans.
And I will for the Democrats.
And the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, will be for Democrats. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. We will be meeting, I believe, at 3 o'clock p.m. tomorrow, Tuesday. Thank you. This concludes our work for the day.